The cabin was already tense when the argument started. A white woman in designer sunglasses stood in the aisle, one hand gripping a first-class seat, the other pointing sharply at the man beside her. "That's my seat," she said loudly. "I paid for it. You need to move." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just looked at his boarding pass again, calm as still water. Chuck Norris. A few passengers glanced up. Others pretended not to watch, though every ear was listening. The flight attendant froze, eyes darting between the woman's outrage and the quiet confidence of the man blocking the aisle. "I don't know how you got up here," the woman scoffed loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "But first class isn't for people who look like that." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the plane. Chuck finally looked up and smiled faintly. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "that seat won't matter in a few minutes." She laughed. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Call the airline?" Chuck stepped aside without another word. As the flight attendant reached for her intercom, the cockpit door opened, and everything on that plane was about to change. The plane hummed with the low roar of engines as passengers fidgeted, adjusting pillows, reading, scrolling on their phones. Most tried to ignore the growing tension in the first-class cabin, but the scene near the front was impossible to miss. The woman, mid-30s, wore designer clothes, an air of entitlement practically radiating off her. She tapped her foot, snapped her fingers at the flight attendant, and waved her boarding pass like a weapon. "I paid for this seat. Move. Now." The attendant hesitated, caught between policy and fear, while passengers craned their necks. Some whispered, others raised phones discreetly, capturing the confrontation. Chuck Norris remained calm, leaning lightly against the armrest, his boarding pass held loosely in one hand. His eyes were steady, unfazed by the theatrics. He didn't argue. He didn't escalate. The contrast only made the woman more frustrated. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I booked this seat weeks ago. Do you even know what class this is?" A few passengers snickered, emboldening her. But Chuck just tilted his head and said quietly but firmly, "I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some people glanced at each other confused. Who was this man, so calm in the middle of such chaos? One elderly passenger whispered, "He looks familiar, but I can't place him." The flight attendant, trying to keep control, said, "Sir, ma'am, please, let's—" "I don't care about your rules," the woman interrupted. "People like him don't belong here. First class isn't for the quiet ones." Chuck's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Sometimes," he said, "the quiet ones are the ones everyone should listen to." The woman scoffed and waved dismissively. "Spare me the lectures." A few rows back, an older couple exchanged glances, a hint of recognition in their eyes. One whispered, "Isn't that—" But the words caught in their throats, swallowed by disbelief. Outside, the plane waited on the tarmac. Inside, tension crackled like static electricity. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary flight, and soon the truth would shock every person on board. Before we continue, take a moment and comment where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how people react when they're caught in situations like this. The woman planted herself firmly in the aisle, arms crossed, glaring at Chuck with every ounce of entitlement she could muster. "I don't know who you think you are," she said, voice rising, "but first class is for people who pay attention to rules. Move before I call the attendant again." Chuck Norris didn't flinch. He adjusted his jacket, calm and unbothered, and replied in that steady, quiet voice, "Ma'am, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." The cabin went silent for a beat. A few passengers exchanged glances, some trying to stifle laughter, others leaning forward, sensing the confrontation could turn explosive. The flight attendant hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene or let the situation resolve itself. "I paid for this seat. Do you even know how much first class costs?" the woman barked. "I could buy this plane." A murmur rippled through the rows. A young man near the back whispered to his partner, "Wait, isn't that Chuck Norris?" The partner squinted, unsure, shaking their head. No way, that can't be. Chuck's gaze didn't leave her. Sometimes arrogance makes people think money equals power, he said softly. But it doesn't. The woman's nostrils flared. What are you even talking about? This is my seat. Security will… Before she could finish, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew, please report to the cockpit immediately. Passenger in first class creating disturbance. Repeat, first class disturbance. The woman's confidence faltered slightly. She leaned in, smirking. See? Authority agrees with me. Chuck Norris didn't react. He only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable because it felt like he knew something they didn't. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Phones were subtly raised. Whispers like static filled the air. That has to be him. No, it can't be. Finally, the woman stomped her foot. Enough. If he thinks he can just… She paused mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as she noticed the flight attendant and a couple of nearby staff subtly moving toward Chuck, showing deference. Something in their gestures made her freeze. Chuck finally broke the silence. Ma'am, you may enjoy your seat now, but be aware, sometimes the person you look down on has more power than you realize. The cabin went quiet, tension thick as smoke. The woman's eyes widened. What? What are you talking about? Chuck turned, glanced toward the cockpit, and then back at her, calm as ever. Let's just say, this flight isn't exactly what it seems. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, hearts racing. Some had been recording, some were just watching in stunned silence. Every pair of eyes followed Chuck as if the man were a storm passing through the cabin. And outside on the tarmac, the plane's engines hummed steadily, unaware that the momentary calm inside would soon erupt into chaos. At that moment, nobody realized how high the stakes were, or how much the woman's arrogance had just set herself up for humiliation. The first twist was coming, and it would change everything on that plane forever. The flight attendant took a hesitant step toward the cockpit, phone in hand, and whispered something to the captain. His eyes widened ever so slightly, and for the first time, he seemed nervous. The woman, noticing the shift in energy, puffed her chest out. "What is it now? Are you finally admitting I'm right?" she demanded. "Or are you just scared because I'm correct?" Chuck Norris didn't answer. He remained calm, leaning lightly on the armrest, eyes scanning the cabin with quiet patience. That faint, almost imperceptible smile lingered on his lips. A few rows back, passengers began exchanging glances, uncertain but intrigued. The elderly couple who had murmured earlier now whispered urgently to each other, "I knew I recognized him. Could it really be?" Meanwhile, the cabin crew subtly shifted their stance, suddenly attentive to Chuck's every move. The woman noticed, irritation flashing across her face. "What's going on? Why are you all staring at him like that?" One of the flight attendants, trying to maintain composure, cleared her throat. "Ma'am, it seems there may be a complication with this flight. We'll need to temporarily hold boarding while we sort it out." The woman scoffed, assuming it was some minor delay. "Oh, please. You're just bending over backward for him because he's… What? Famous? Not enough to impress me." Chuck Norris finally spoke, softly enough that only the nearest passengers could hear. Sometimes, people in positions of power choose to remain unseen, until it matters. The woman's brow furrowed. She didn't understand, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. Something was off. The energy in the cabin had changed. The murmurs were louder, and people were subtly moving closer to watch. Suddenly, the cockpit door opened. A pair of sharply dressed executives stepped inside, carrying folders and documents. The captain quickly moved aside, and the cabin's attention shifted entirely. "Mr. Norris," one executive called, voice steady but tinged with excitement. "We've been waiting for you." The woman froze, her confidence draining in an instant. "Wait. What?" she whispered, voice trembling. Chuck finally gave her a small, knowing smile. "Ma'am," he said, calm as ever, "sometimes the person you dismiss is the one running the show." Whispers erupted. Passengers whipped out phones. The realization hit slowly, like a wave rolling across the cabin. The man she had ridiculed, the one she thought had no right to first class, wasn't just a passenger. He was in charge of the entire airline. Her cheeks burned, her mouth opened, but no words came out. The quiet authority that had seemed invisible until now suddenly became overwhelming, leaving everyone, including her, speechless. The first twist had landed, and the woman, who thought she was untouchable, was about to learn a lesson she would never forget. The cabin went silent. Passengers held their breaths, phones still raised, hearts racing. The woman's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating like mist in the sun. She stared at Chuck Norris, the man she had mocked and belittled, and finally noticed the subtle shift in how everyone around him behaved. The executives approached Chuck with folders in hand, deferential, almost nervous. "Mr. Norris," one said, bowing slightly, "we've been waiting for you. Everything is ready for your inspection." The woman's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. "Wait, you mean that's him?" Her voice trembled. "You own the airline?" Chuck Norris didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, calm and composed, the kind of quiet authority that made every eye in the cabin lock onto him. "Yes," he said. "I'm the majority owner of this airline. I travel anonymously to see how real passengers are treated, especially in first class." The murmurs around the cabin turned into audible gasps. The elderly couple muttered, "I knew it. It had to be him." A young man whispered into his phone, "You won't believe who's sitting in 1A." The woman's legs felt like jelly. She wanted to apologize, to explain herself, but no words would come out. Her hands trembled as she realized she had not only been rude, but arrogant, assuming that appearances determined authority. Chuck looked around the cabin, eyes settling on the flight attendant who had tried to intervene early. "You," he said gently, "your respect for passengers, even when situations are difficult, is exactly the kind of attitude this airline needs. Consider yourself recognized." The flight attendant blinked, stunned, as a subtle smile spread across her face. The woman swallowed hard. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were." Her voice was barely audible. "I never should have spoken to you like that." Chuck shook his head slowly. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't assume, ever. Respect isn't about who someone is on paper. It's about how you treat them when no one is watching." She looked down, humiliated, as passengers watched quietly, some shaking their heads, others trying not to laugh at the poetic justice unfolding. One of the executives handed Chuck a document. He glanced at it briefly, then addressed the cabin. "From this point forward, any passenger who treats staff or other travelers with disrespect will be reminded of one simple truth. Everyone deserves dignity." The woman's shoulders slumped. She finally moved aside, gesturing meekly for Chuck to take the seat. The cabin had shifted. The mood was lighter but charged with awe and respect. Chuck sat, relaxed as ever, radiating a calm power that made everyone rethink what authority really looked like. Phones were put down, whispers subsided, and the realization sank in. The man she had scorned was not just famous or capable. He was the ultimate authority on that plane. And as the engines hummed to life, the woman finally understood the lesson she had ignored so arrogantly. Appearances can be deceiving. Power is often silent, and respect, true respect, is earned, not assumed. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some shaking their heads, some whispering in amazement. One passenger muttered, "That was the most intense flight of my life." Chuck Norris smiled faintly, as if the chaos of human ego around him was nothing more than background noise. He had made his point without anger, without humiliation. The lesson had been delivered, and everyone on that plane would remember it forever. The woman finally lowered her gaze, shame written across her face. She had spent the last several minutes in a mix of disbelief and panic, realizing just how badly she had misjudged Chuck Norris. Her entitled attitude, her arrogance, and her loud complaints had all collided into one painful truth. She had been wrong. Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply gestured toward the seat she had claimed. "Please," he said calmly, "take a moment to reflect on your actions. Respect isn't about status or money. It's about how you treat others, every day." The flight attendant, still slightly shaken from the confrontation, stepped forward. "Sir, thank you for noticing the way I tried to handle the situation." Chuck nodded at her. "You stayed professional, even when it was difficult. That's what makes someone reliable. Keep that attitude. It matters more than you realize." The woman, realizing that apology was the only path forward, murmured, I understand now. I shouldn't have spoken like that. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked slightly, humility finally replacing arrogance. Chuck simply gave a faint nod, silent acknowledgement that her apology had been received. Around the cabin, passengers exhaled. Phones were slowly put away, whispers fading into quiet reflection. The mood had shifted from tension to awe. People realized they had witnessed more than a flight disruption. They had witnessed a lesson in humility, patience, and the quiet power of respect. The executives approached Chuck briefly, finalizing a few quick details, then stepped back, allowing the flight to proceed normally. Chuck adjusted his seat and looked around the cabin once more. Everyone was watching, but not out of fear or curiosity, out of admiration. Even the woman now sat quietly, head bowed, reflecting on the lesson she would never forget. The flight attendants returned to their duties, smiling more confidently, reassured that their efforts and professionalism mattered. As the plane took off, a sense of calm settled over the cabin. Chuck Norris had shown everyone, without shouting or confrontation, that true authority comes from patience, humility, and the respect you extend to others, regardless of who they are. The engines roared to life, the cabin lights glinting off polished surfaces, and life slowly returned to normal. But for everyone who had witnessed the event, the lesson lingered. Appearances can deceive, arrogance can blind, and the quietest people often hold the greatest power. And somewhere between takeoff and cruising altitude, one woman had learned a lesson that would stick with her for life. Respect, she now knew, wasn't optional. It was essential. As the plane leveled off and the hum of the engines filled the cabin, the lesson of the flight settled over everyone like a quiet weight. Passengers whispered to each other, not about fame or wealth, but about respect. The woman who had caused the commotion sat silently, her earlier arrogance replaced with reflection. Chuck Norris didn't need to announce his authority or flaunt his power. His presence alone, calm and unshakable, had done more to teach humility than any argument or reprimand could have. He had shown that true power is quiet, invisible until it matters most, and that respect is earned through patience, not status. The flight attendants exchanged relieved smiles. They had been tested, and their professionalism had been noticed. Even small acts of patience, kindness, and composure mattered, sometimes more than anyone realized. For the passengers, the lesson was clear. How you treat others, especially when you assume no one is watching, defines your character far more than wealth, fame, or appearances ever could. And for those watching this story unfold, the reminder is just as important. Humility, patience, and respect are never wasted. A moment of kindness or a calm demeanor can leave a stronger impression than arrogance or entitlement ever will. If you learned something from this story, type respect in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We want to celebrate every kind and humble person out there. More incredible stories are coming soon, each one with twists, lessons, and moments that remind us what really matters. Share which parts of this flight shocked you, inspired you, or made you think differently about power and humility. Your feedback helps us make these stories even better. Because in life, as in the skies, true strength is silent, and true respect is earned, not assumed.